First up on our broadcast, China has released a white paper on its biodiversity conservation as it prepares for a major UN conference next week. The document says around 10,000 protected areas have been established since China set up its first nature reserve in 1956. The populations of the giant panda, Asian elephant, and crested ibis have seen steady growth in the country over the past 4 decades. China says it's actively implementing the Convention on Biological Diversity, and it firmly supports multilateral cooperation on facilitating biodiversity. For more, let's check in with my colleague, Cui Huiyao, live in Beijing. Well, you were at that press conference earlier this morning. What more can you tell us about the white paper and its many highlights?
Hello there, Zhongshi. Today's release is important not just because of the timing, but also because of the fact that China is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world. Now, according to International Union for Conservation of Nature, it has over 34,000 unclassified species of animals and plants. That means protecting these species, especially the endangered and vulnerable ones, is of paramount importance. Well, like this white paper, it says China has established the 10 national parks since 2015, and the system was built on a trial basis, including one at Sanjiangyuan, the cradle of China's Yangtze, Yellow, and Lancang rivers. And China was also the first in the world to propose and implement the so-called red line strategy. That is a strategy for ecological conservation, which officials say is an important policy in China's planning on land use. So, for example, areas such as the Qinghai Tibet Plateau and Tian Shan Mountains, they have been brought under strict protection. Now, this also includes the most endangered species and their habitats. And we also need to mention another key aspect of China's effort, that is improving relevant laws and regulations. Now, over the past decade, China has promulgated and revised more than 20 laws in this area, including forestry, grassland, and fishery. And China has included biodiversity in its 14th five-year plan, that is from 2021 to 2025, and concrete goals have been set, including increasing forest coverage to 24% by 2025. Well, under all this effort, biodiversity loss has been restored to some extent. And let's take a listen to what ZHAO YINGMIN, Vice Minister of Ecology and Environment, has to say on this.
目前，中国90%的
90% of the country's terrestrial ecosystem types and 71% of the state protected wildlife species are now under effective protection. The population of wild giant pandas, for example, has grown from around 1,100 to over 1,800 over the past 4 decades.
Now, this is all remarkable considering that globally biodiversity loss is happening at an alarming rate. The UN report in 2019 says human activity has significantly impacted and altered 75% of our planet's land and 66% of the ocean. And China is contributing its effort to protect biodiversity, and it is not just doing it by itself. It works closely with other countries, mainly through mechanisms like the Belt and Road Initiative and South-South cooperation. And authorities say China helps these developing nations to protect biodiversity as well. Now, of course, biodiversity conservation is a long-term task. It is a very hard battle. Officials say China will carry out more systematic protection, and that's the message from the presser today. And these efforts include setting specific timetables for key projects, improving the observation network, strengthening monitoring of those national parks and protected areas, and further legal protection for biodiversity and wildlife. That's all from me. Back to you, Zhongshi.
CGT and Cui Huiyao on that biodiversity white paper today, the first of its kind to be released by China. Well, thank you for that report. Joining me in the studio, Zhao Zhonghua. He is China's chief representative for the global advocacy group World Animal Protection. Mr. Zhao, welcome to the program. You and I were just talking about how the word priority came up a lot in that press conference where the white paper was released. Help us understand why biodiversity has been a priority for the Chinese government.
Okay, thanks, Zhongshi. Yes, as we mentioned, biodiversity as a priority is very consistent with the ancient Chinese philosophy. as Confucianism, Taoism all suggest human beings should live in harmony with nature. None of them suggest human beings should excessively exploit nature. At the same time, the modern China wanted to responsibly respond to a crisis from nature. As the UN chief said, making peace with nature is the most important task in the 21st century. So China's role is one to play a responsible global player. As Chinese president, she put it clearly and beautifully, lucid water and lush mountains are invaluable assets. This has become a household word in China and become part of Chinese ecological civilization, which is great. So it's all consistent with the ancient philosophy and modern world understanding of the world.
Biodiversity, Mr. Zhao, of course, is a very broad concept. We're talking about animals, species, humans, but since you work with animal protection, I do want to ask you one question about what we have achieved when it comes to preserving animal life. We have the increase in the Asian elephant population in Yunnan, and the giant panda got off the endangered list. So what do you think are China's experiences in protecting animals in particular, and are there experiences that China is ready to share with the rest of the world?
Yes. Okay, China definitely has quite a lot to share. The first thing is China has completely shifted the direction. Put conservation first before economic development. So it's in its strategic planning actions always put conservation first. So all the budget, the efforts have been put on protect the animals. So that's one thing we can learn. The second is China has practically put animal protection, biodiversity protection in the leaders, government officials' work targets, KPIs. So everybody should be responsible for it. And China also done very well in terms of awareness reason. The whole nation, every person knows it's important to protect the biodiversity of animals. So these are things we definitely can learn.
You don't need me to tell you how important legislation is when it comes to regulating individual behavior and the actions by enterprises. China has enacted specific laws to protect both wildlife and vegetation. How would you assess these efforts, the legislative efforts by China?
Yes. As we mentioned, China has shifted its priority from economic development to conservation prioritized. And that is a historical phenomenal shift. It's a 180-degree shift. So the laws, the regulations serve the measures to actually turn the whole direction. So these laws are extremely advanced. It takes the wisdom of the world philosophy and many science and other countries' experience. So it's very wise, it's scientifically subtle. At the same time, it has been very well implemented. There are very practical measures to ensure these laws are effective.